Hello everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor David Salomon from Hildesheim University, a friend of mine, or actually a friend of a friend, so a friend. And he teaches at Hildesheim University. He has published widely in political aesthetics, democratic theory, imperialism, political education, the politics of education, and he's also the editor of a German journal called Marxist Renewal. So in case you want to make some paper proposals, having listened to David's talk, I'm sure you'll be more than welcome. So let's give a round of applause to David and welcome him to Brighton.
Thanks a lot. Yes, my talk had the title "The Politicization of University" or "The Politicization of Science," and I have to read because it's my first longer talk in the English language. So I hope it's okay if I not speak fully free. The question, "What's university for?" seems to be an easy one. Since the academies of ancient Greek, the educational establishment mainly serves two purposes: collecting and broadening the knowledge of the time and supporting the ruling class, as well as reproducing the intelligentsia. The first universities of the Middle Ages also had a well-defined task. In order to strengthen the feudal system, they were to produce jurists, doctors, and last but not least, theologians. So important functions for the ruling class. It is the big elite universities we know nowadays that still serve this task to reproduce the ruling class and the ruling intelligentsia. It is the big, however, there is and always has been a certain tension between these distinct functions. Collecting and broadening the knowledge sometimes came into conflict with the need to reproduce the established power relation. What is a relatively young phenomenon is the mass universities we have nowadays. They are academies that mainly serve the professional qualification. After World War II, the universities still used to be elitist, thus only available for a little privileged part of society. Yet the opening of university had no emancipatory intention whatsoever, but was driven by the need of highly skilled employees for industry becoming more and more complex. Not only in Germany have these academic reforms been criticized, and I'm from Germany, so my examples are often the German university, because you are the expert of the British university system. And maybe we can look in the discussion what's to compare between these two traditions of university. So not only in Germany have these academic reforms in the 60s been criticized by the rebellious students of the 60s, who felt that university had become a technocratic mass university, merely offering the right to vocational training. Indeed, the idea of a mass university perfectly suited to the Fordistic paradigm of mass production. So you have the mass universities and you have also mass production, and yes, there is a relationship between these two topics. Nowadays, theorists point out a new era, the post-Fordistic one, some people say it's also a neoliberalistic capitalism, has begun for the universities. With a, how Marx would say, real subsumption of knowledge and education under the capital, some sociologists speak of a process accompanying our way into the knowledge society. The ongoing debate about university mostly takes place in the context of the latest neoliberal academic reforms. The modularization of degree programs did not lead to more freedom and possible choices, but quite the contrary, to more regimentation and pressure when it comes to examinations. Since at the very same time the business world got more and more precarious, causing what industrial sociologists calls a regime of fear, the students to feel, to take a German word, Zukunftsangst, so that means agency about the future. Add to this tuition fees many time admissions quota, the Latin word numeri clausi, not only between school and college, but also between bachelor and master, tight deadlines for term papers, expulsion when failing a test for the third time, and rigid attendance check to get the big picture. This structure of studies and lecturing corresponds with a scientific landscape that is governed by the need of acquiring external funds, a centralized evaluation, and a general fast-paced hustle. I quote a German philosopher named Peter Bierry, who put it out some years ago very precisely. He writes, "When I look who are today's heroes on TV and the papers, I see but facades with nothing behind them." The same goes for universities that are currently being destroyed by their forced adjustment to the rules of management consulting. We constantly get questionnaires. How many visiting professorships did you hold? How many external funds were you able to acquire? This really is a dictatorship of hustle, Bierry says. All these things don't have a thing in common with the authentic motivation of a professor. So, Peter Bierry. About the academic activities and that leave no room. And important is these academic activities leave no room for leisure, neither for teachers and scientists, nor for students. Thus, talking about the old university seems somehow outmoded, given this reality. We shall not forget that academies, like all public educational establishments, are ideological apparatus of the state, how Althusser would say. Their concept and development cannot be looked in a way isolated from the social relations of power, for they are an agglomeration of this power, as the state theorist Nikos Poulantzas would say. This means they are battlefield of social struggles as well. The focus of vocational training becomes problematic when all learning processes are reduced to it, thus ignoring all kinds of critical reflection and subjugating learning to the inherent exploitation logic of capitalism that sees its ultimate purpose in profit only. There are mainly two ways in which this pull towards university by the market is carried out, as the sociologist Michael Burroboy puts it aptly. At one hand, we see a direct commodification, for example, patents in the natural sciences, and not only the natural sciences. And on the other hand, a competitive regulation is established via means such as, in Germany, for example, the Exzellenzinitiative, that means excellence initiative, output monitoring, evaluations, and so on. However, these regulations more and more come into conflict with the idea of the freedom teaching which the bourgeois university once had claimed. An interesting point that Burroboy says on this when he argues with the regulation, he says that's a little bit like an economic plan system, but not an economy that would be not problematic, but a plan system for the universities, or for the thinking. So the neoliberal reform of university brings a form of plan. The neoliberal reform brings a sort of plan system which is disciplinizing the thinking and disciplinizing knowledge, and I think that's a big problem. However, I have lost the point. Claimed, yes. The question what a contemporary university could be like, thus has to be grounded on the concept of university from the past. It is the university that fundamental contradictions are agglomerated, contradictions that have been evolved within the bourgeois society shortly after French Revolution. The age of enlightenment so solemnly had freed science from the chains of religious paternalism. Now I quote Friedrich Engels with his book in German, Die Entwicklung des Sozialismus von der Utopie zur Wissenschaft. The English title is Socialism, Utopian and Scientific. The German title means the development of socialism from the utopian one to a scientific one. And Engels wrote in this very popular book in the 19th century, the great men that prepared the minds for the upcoming revolutions themselves appeared very revolutionary. They would not acknowledge any kind of authority, whatever it might be. Religion, view of nature, state system, everything was subjected to ruthless criticism. Everything had to be justified its mere existence in front of the tribunal of reason, or else cease to exist. So Engels. But as Engels underlines, this demand failed when confronted with the reign of the capital. Again Engels, now we know that the realm of enlightenment was nothing but a dream, the ideal realm of the bourgeoisie, that eternal justice meant the justice of the bourgeoisie, and that equality meant nothing more than just the bourgeois equality before the law. Furthermore, the human right emergent to right to property and the realm of reason, Rousseau's social contract, came into life the only possible way, the bourgeois democratic republic. End of the quote. The separation of society into bourgeoisie and proletariat, how do you say proletariat?
Well, I'm also German, so...
Yes. Okay, the separation of society into bourgeois and proletariat caused by exploitation structures replaced old prejudices and status privileges, also in the area of science. Yet apart from fascism, where the ideas of the Enlightenment era were openly negated, the bourgeois society cannot get rid of its universalism. Notably, the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre indicates that the contradiction between self-perception and reality of the bourgeois reign promotes the development of intellectual opposition. Brain workers become intellectuals, technicians of practical knowledge, as Sartre denotes them, when they start to feel the contradiction between their everyday work being functionally focused on particular interests and the universalism of human rights, and when, furthermore, they seek a solution to overcome said contradictions in favor of the human rights. I quote Sartre, "The intellectual thus is a technician of common things, who, in his own area, becomes aware of the fact that commonality does not exist per se, but always is to be created." End of the quote. With a direct commodification of almost every area of life, the contradiction between market-oriented schooling and self-development is less visible today than it used to be in the 60s, but never did it cease to exist. Whoever wants to fight in and for the educational institutions needs more to do, even if this remains necessary too, than just criticizing the selective access to university. At the same time, one has to consider the scientific system itself, along with the very content of higher education. The struggle for a different university, whose realization requires the struggle for a better society, needs a new concept of university. In the following, I will initially address the philosophy of the Enlightenment era and how philosophers at the time thought about science at university, especially about the relationship between theory and praxis. Thereafter, however, I will come back to our present, arguing that only the politicization of university can oppose this commodification. So, and when I speak about the Enlightenment, I speak mainly about the Enlightenment in Germany. That's because I'm from Germany, and this debate is the debate I know the best. And for the German case, it's important that in contrast to France, the era of Enlightenment in Germany would not lead to a revolution. The main impact concerning the concept of university was the ideas of Wilhelm von Humboldt, the founder of Berlin University. Basically, a rigid separation between theory and praxis, university and political action was established. This is why positions such as the German Jacobins Benjamin Erhard, who in 1795 proclaimed the right of every people to have their own revolution, remain an exception in the German-speaking area. Nevertheless, the Tribunal of Reason was built here as well, albeit without the guillotine. Two essays in particular have become famous, both published in the Berlinische Monatsschrift, Monthly Journal of Berlin, that was the title of this journal, in September and December 1784. Both are in this month published there. The first one is Moses Mendelssohn's über die Frage, was heißt aufklären, in English about the question, what does enlightenment mean? And the second one, Beantwortung der Frage, was ist Aufklärung? So, an answer to the question, what is enlightenment, by Immanuel Kant. I quote Moses Mendelssohn, the words enlightenment, culture, and education. And when I now say education, it's not absolutely correct, because in the German debate we have a very, very complicated concept, which is called Bildung, and which is not to translate in other languages, and there's many, many metaphysical German thinking in relation with this concept. But I translate it now as education, because in this context it's absolutely enough to translate it in this meaning. The words enlightenment, culture, and education are very new for our language, Moses Mendelssohn writes, and he goes to explaining, quote, the more the convivial condition of a people has, by means of art and diligence, been harmonized with the destiny of man, the more educated the people is. Education is divided into culture and enlightenment. The first one seems to be of more practical use, whereas the latter seems to be connected to the realm of theory, connected to sensible knowledge and the capability to think about human life according to the importance of things and their influence on human life. End of the quote. Mendelssohn continues explaining that enlightenment relates to culture as does theory to praxis. The distinction, we can say, leads to another important difference, the destiny of man as man and the destiny of man as citizen, which do not necessarily need to correspond, and consequently to different kinds of enlightenment are required. The distinction also reflects the relation between education and vocational training. Moses Mendelssohn writes, quote, the part of enlightenment that deals with man as man is universal, hence ignoring differences in the social status, whereas the part that deals with man as citizen is modified according to social status and profession. Human enlightenment may come into conflict with citizen enlightenment. End of the quote. Kant's approach, however, seems to be more radical. He defines enlightenment as man's emergence from his self-imposed immaturity. And it's very important, this the self-imposed of the immaturity is an important argument in the system of Kant, because if it's your own fault. Also, if it's your own fault that you being in immaturity, you have in every time the chance to go out of this. So this argument is not sociological blind. It is a very important argument. And so he says, enlightenment is the man's emergence from his self-imposed immaturity. Only he, end of the quote, only he who follows the maxim of sapere aude, dare to make use of your own understanding, can leave the self-imposed immaturity behind. Kant's starting point is a free subjectivity that isn't kept in leading strings of heteronymous guidance. But he too is confronted with a problem of theory and praxis, and solves it, maybe biased in a favor of a freed theory. The distinction between public use of reason in the free realm of a universal republic of letters and the private use of reason within bourgeois conditions follows the same pattern as Mendelssohn's human enlightenment versus citizen enlightenment, although Kant could not have known Mendelssohn's text at the time. Public use of reason always has to be free, for it alone can lead to enlightenment. Private use of reason, nevertheless, many oftentimes be limited very narrowly, but without impeding the advance of enlightenment at all. End of the quote. The ambivalence of Kant's distinction, whose importance hardly can be objected, may be seen, for instance, in the case of a judge who questions the law he executes in his essays and treatises without being guilty of perversion of justice in office. So it is an important argument, that you have this distinction between a public and a private use of reason, but it also has a problem. This becomes even more concrete when it comes to political obedience. Kant writes, keep on thinking as much as you wish, but obey. Kant quotes his king Friedrich II, also Friedrich den Großen, Frederick II, and calls his century, the century of this king, the era of enlightenment. Yet it surely would go too far to blame the proponents of enlightenment slowly for the separation of theory and praxis that soon was to become dominant in academic discourse. In the self-perception of the Enlightenment's philosophers, political impact was intended and should evolve on the long run. Nonetheless, the foundation was laid for the separation, and the German poet Heine would jeer 60 years later in his Winter's Tale, Frenchman and Russian possess the land, Great Britain is king of the sea, the lofty realm of dreams, however, is owned by Germany. The idea of university as proclaimed by Humboldt has inspired the foundation of Berlin's university in 1810. Now it's called Humboldt University, after this founder. And its basic idea was the supremacy of free reasoning above society and political circumstances. The philosopher and sociologist Jürgen Habermas, in particular, consistently refers to this when writing about academic aporia. Quote, what we call idea or concept of university is, since the days of Humboldt, the project of the epitomization of an ideal form of life. This very idea, before all other core ideas, is clearly set apart, for it does not refer to just one of the many possible forms of life within the bourgeois society that is stratified along professions, but rather, thanks to its close relation to science and truth, refers to something universal which does exist before all pluralisms of the bourgeois life. This idea of university points to all educational laws according to which every objective mind is formed. Objective mind in the sense of Hegel, one of the important teachers in the early Berlin University. End of the quote. Science, just having escaped from the paternalism of religion, should, while being protected by the state, be independent from both orders from authorities and from influences of the bourgeois society that is interested in the useful result of scientific work. At the same time, the state, that thus was the proclamation, should have a vivid interest in the self-determination and freedom of science. Quote Habermas, if only the scientific work could follow the inherent dynamic of research, hence maintaining the principle that science is to be seen as something untraced and that can never be completely discovered, then the moral culture, and even more, so the intellectual life of a nation would be centralized in the higher academies, and as is focused therein. As Jürgen Habermas points out, this line of argument entirely follows the tradition of enlightenment. The aim to the regard the enlightened human being together with the enlightened enlightened nation. The idea, Habermas, the idea of the unity of science and enlightenment was exuberant insofar that the academic autonomy has to carry the burden of anticipating a society of free and equal men that was to arise as a microcosm within the university walls. This picture corresponded with the central status of philosophy that seemed to bundle the general expertise concerning the humankind. Consequently, the higher academies have not only been regarded at a peak of the whole educational system, but rather a, quote, crown of the nation's moral culture. Yet it remained vague from the very beginning how this emancipatory task could go together with the political austereness that university had to pay the exchange for its internal freedom. End of the quote. And that was the last of these long quotes. The old concept of university and subsequently the organization of university as an ideological apparatus did, we can say, condense the contradiction between civic duty and enlightenment. Moreover, between vocational training for state officials in the old university and self-development. Ideally for the whole kind, actually just for the members of the dominant ruling class. This paradox could never be solved, and finally university failed due to it. That was the theoretical main part, and I come now back to the current question of capitalism and university and the problems of the politicization of university. With the industrialization and more obvious economic class rule, the separation of university from the political conditions of a state that secret its freedom became questionable. Even more because university educated from its duty to educate the industrial elite of the new production. The academic reforms that took place everywhere in the late 19th century were merely a reaction to a deep crisis that was becoming more and more visible. The ancient idea of humanism was just an empty phrase that couldn't oppose neither to imperialism nor, in Germany and Italy, for example, to fascism later on. But as toothless and affirmative humanism had become, its concept for university was also dysfunctional with regard to the development of capital goods. How was it possible to integrate sophisticated nature sciences and newly arising engineering sciences into the classical canon? The academic reforms after 1945 tried to solve the contradiction between theory and praxis, now by emphasizing the latter. This This is also what Thatcher's interventions were all about. Burroughs calls it the regulation of knowledge, and what the Bologna process is indeed intended to be, focusing on praxis, where praxis does not mean political praxis, but commercial usability. This new concept of university has nothing in common with a spirit of unity that interpreted the various disciplines as coherent perspectives on the world. Rather, the paradigm of usability has replaced the academic autonomous philosophy bearing a hidden theology that is not free in the same sense that the openly proclaimed ultimate justification of the pre-Enlightenment era used not to be free. This is the reason for the crisis of science and humanities also, that Edmund Husserl spots in loss of significance for life. And this reason has nothing to do with the evolvement of a quasi-nature-like differentiation between functional knowledge systems. The separation of sciences from that what Husserl calls Lebenswelt, also world of life, world of daily life also, becomes transparent as a political problem where the question of unity can only be asked as a social one. That considers the power rule in society. Especially in our age of the subsumption of all spheres of knowledge under the reign of capital, any try to re-establish unity must fail if it remains theoretical and apolitical. And that's the main thesis. Here is the limit of Habermas' thoughts in that direction. On one hand, Habermas is right saying, quote, that in the end the communicative forms of scientific argumentation keep learning processes in university together. But on the other hand, we have to ask why, contrary to all chit-chat of interdisciplinarity, the dialogue between the disciplines and subdisciplines is often failing. The general context in academic autonomy cannot harmonize with the existing structures. However, the bourgeois science is incapable of fully ignoring its roots, the universalism of an argument seeking the truth. And this is my argument. Since the contradiction I have described is a political one. The concept of a different university has to be based upon the politicization of university, which furthermore includes two kinds of criticism. Negative criticism does in every science and in every area of knowledge question all statements with regards to the conditions of society in which they appear, whereas positive criticism consists of putting the sciences in service of man. Both forms are expressed in the final monologue of Bertolt Brecht's play Galileo Galilei. I quote this. It's the scene Galilei sits in exile and his student Andrea comes after many years and asks him, why did you do what you did? Was das Repudiate? Yeah. Repudiate, yes. He repudiates his thinking, his scientific thinking, and Andrea asked, "Why did you do?" And said, "Nah, okay, maybe you did it because that was a chance not to be burned and to save your researchers." And in this, and Galilei says, "No, it was a big crime I did." And then he argued, "Following science, at least so does it seems to me, demands some kind of bravery. It deals with knowledge obtained via doubting, and in doing so, it tries to make everybody doubt. As a scientist, I did have a unique opportunity in my time. Science reached the marketplaces." That's the point. Science reached the marketplaces. Under these very special circumstances, the resolution of a man could have caused an immense shock. Had I been able to resist, we as scientists of nature may have developed something like the Hippocratic Oath for scientists to only use our knowledge for the welfare of mankind. End of the quote. This kind of understanding of science refers to the Enlightenment era, where Moses Mendelssohn said, "I will at any time put the destiny of man as a goal to focus if you don't want to get lost with our endeavors and efforts." If Brecht's Galilei surpasses bourgeois enlightenment, then by recognizing that the implementation of a new science remains connected to the marketplaces, in a very Consus-Borrowian sense, this science has to be a public one. It would nonetheless too easy to postulate a common goal for the science and humanities, like the categorical imperative of Marx to overthrow all structures wherein man is a humiliated, fettered, and lost and disdainful being. The concept of science that requires the willingness to found a university idea with all given perspective, questions, and different ways of researching will be attacked. This idea will have to unify theory and praxis and be connected to social movements. It will develop a self-determined way of researching that must not be afraid of public debates. The attacks, however, will not only come from outside, but also from the discipline itself, in which this way is postulated. Hence, the demand for politicization claims a concept of university that does not seek unity, but quite the contrary, openly fights the struggle for public functions of university. Last but not least, this implies to tread the single disciplines and places of conflict. Only quarreling sciences, you can say, only quarreling sciences are able to communicate between themselves and in society. Walter Benjamin, and that's the end of my lecture, Walter Benjamin ends his essay, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, by contrast, also in German, das Kunstwerk im Zeitalter seiner technischen Reproduzierbarkeit, by contrasting the aestheticization of politics, which he saw in fascism, and the politicization of art, which he hoped for in communism. Politicization, according to Benjamin, is self-empowerment, regaining authority in the struggle against a predetermined destiny. Even though neoliberalism is no fascism, it too demands subjugation. The pretended inherent necessities of the market, that just there is no alternative, all this must be described as an ideology that threatens the autonomy of science by, as Borowai points out, negating the right of university to set its own research objectives and fight for the legitimacy of its own interests. Thus, politicization, in the sense of Benjamin, means recuperation of scope of action. If it is true that we are on our way into the knowledge society, the concept of university just described could be able to add a fundamental part to the change of social conditions where ideas become institutions. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Yes, please.
I think that you've recently been awarded a prize, and I'd like to offer my congratulations on that. It's true, isn't it? You've recently got a prize.
Sorry.
Sie haben neulich einen Preis bekommen.
Ach so, danke schön.
Yeah, I wanted to congratulate
Yes,
you.
thank you.
I just wanted to make a comment, largely historical comments. The first is that there was a man called Hamann, you may have heard of, who criticized both Mendelssohn and Kant. Moses Mendelssohn, that he followed the Enlightenment and would end up in persecution of the Jews, which is to some extent true, and Kant, because he talked about Mundigkeit and so on, and yet was subservient to the king, you know. So these are contradictions, but that's been passing. But what's more important is that I don't think that one should hold up the Humboldt University and what happened subsequently as the best model, because the first Vice-Chancellor, Fichte, held out the German Sonderweg, if you like, where the Germans are the main culture, their language has something which is taken over from the Greek. Only that language can save Europe. And of course, that we know where that led, through the Sonderweg and the real politicization of the universities by the Nazis.
Okay.
This is the danger of that. Now, of course, it's incidental that the students at the time also grumbled. Fichte was annoyed with them because they said, all this stuff about humanism is all right, we want jobs. So they talked about that even, which is a very modern thing. But I wanted to make the point that the English system, although it's also concerned only with the education of elites and with power, is very different, because it hasn't got this kind of Innerlichkeit, this Bildung, this something comes out of it. It's very empirical, it's very scientific, it's very Lockean, you know, in that sense, and that gives an entirely different tradition. Even though it may be still elite that's running things, it runs it in a rather different way from this idea there's some mystical power which we have, which we'll give to mankind. Sorry, those are just my comments, but I think they're germane.
Would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, maybe I need to go last point. Yes, first to the question of Mendelssohn and Kant. I think, sure, there are many differences between them. And the important, the point is, I think, also Kant is not only for the king. He, in this text, he, yes, sure, says the era of Frederick is the era of enlightenment, but you can have many discussions about it is a tactic, it's not, it's yes, and all this. So his normative ideal was a republic. And there are many texts where he comes to the republic. I think the point, and it's all right what you say about Mendelssohn, sure. The point is that in this early Enlightenment discourse begins a distinction of theory and praxis, which in the later reception of this discourse, has especially problems. That's all. So I would not say that the German Enlightenment and Mendelssohn or Kant are the cause for later problems. An important point is the question of the Sonderweg and the question of a right-wing form and a fascist form of politicization. That's the reason why I come to the end of this lecture to Walter Benjamin. I use the term politicization in a normative sense. So not every functionalization in a political sense is politicization. Only such a form which is interested on contradictions and which looks for fields of struggle. And if you take this topic of politicization, you can say the Nazi university was entpoliticized in a special way. It was maximum and functionalization, and political functional and indoctrination and manipulation and all this. But the Nazis could not accept any form of political discourse, any form of political struggle, and come to that's the reason they come with Volksgemeinschaft and all this points, which have many things to do with the Innerlichkeit and with a special romantic tradition, which yes, a special romantic tradition. That's also important because if you look from a concept of romantic in a European sense, you will find that many revolutionary authors in Germany also can be called as romantic. But that what in Germany was called romantic was mostly conservative and not only conservative, also pre-fascist in many kinds. kinds. And this gives an amalgam between the post-humanism after Humboldt and all these metaphysical approaches and all these points, and this romantic tradition, which then is important for that what you can call German Sonderweg. So I would argue.
Okay, I think you had a question.
I'd like to make a personal statement and then ask a question about how your philosophy, in my opinion, has been partly put into practice recently. In my view, universities cannot avoid being both instruments of the state, but also they're servants of the state. Why? Partly because they're funded by the state, and partly because the state needs people who are capable of managing complexity in one way or another. So to look at the possibility of universities being solely concerned with individual grandeur and enlightenment, which is unrelated to the social context, is, in my view, logically and practically impossible. So that's my position. But it strikes me that there is a society which actually has been pursuing the agenda which you outlined very powerfully in your speech. And this society is Venezuela. Over the last 20 years, Venezuela has been dominated by an ideology of undermining and destroying capitalism, and the ownership of the means of production has moved towards the people. And what happened in Venezuela, so far as universities are concerned, is that they became the socialization engines of the state. Those universities that tried to resist the state were undermined. New universities were set up with the sole endeavor of actually putting into practice the kind of socialist and communist and Marxist philosophies known as neo-Marxism or Latin Marxism that you described. My wife happens to be Venezuelan, and her mother spent 5 hours a day queuing, hopefully, to get some flour. They live in a society which is one of the most dangerous in the world, with the highest rate of inflation, where the mass of the population have and feel no hope and future.
Could you maybe wrap up and ask the question?
And so, if this is the unfolding of the dream which you have advocated, it doesn't sound too attractive to me.
I don't want anything to say about Venezuela, and I would say this question of what Chavez called the Bolivarian Revolution is a very interesting point, but it's not the topic here, because yes, the term of socialism, or the concept of socialism, is surely a debate where you can have many discussions. What I tried was to show that in a special socialist tradition, the Marxist tradition, and you can also discuss about the relationship between Chavismo and Marxism. That's a big debate. But the Marxist, there is the important point that the political has to do with social struggles. And the question of university is how or in which form articulates is social struggle part of this apparatus. And to the first point, with maybe the contradiction, Kant would answer that the question of of enlightenment is also the question of the enlightened ruler. I think that's a problematic perspective, but its argument would be if you have a king which is open for the topics of enlightenment, then you have, yes, an educational, pedagogical relationship between this royal system and the people, and in the long run, the people will become able to take the sovereignty of the people, and then an enlightened royal or an enlightened king would say, now is a point where I have to go back and my people is now adult. So that's Kant's hope. And that was surely from the beginning a very, very big debate. First of all, that's the reason why he comes on Friedrich II in this text. Maybe also in a tactical way, because the Prussian king in the time was a friend of Voltaire, and so it was maybe so. But that's the reason why I quote Johann Benjamin Erhard, one of the German Jacobins, who would say, yeah, but what's maybe, but what's when the king doesn't take place when the people is able to rule? And then Erhard would say, then is the time of revolution. And then there is a right for revolution. And sure, in this moment, when the universities were the place of anticipated revolution, the state comes with all the repression the state has. But in another state of the debate, is the question of the freedom of university, the freedom of revolutionary thinking, while
to dispense with revolutionary acting. That was the classical concept of the German university, and maybe it was a little bit other in the British tradition. I don't know. That would be an interesting question. But the socialism question is a very big question. You can also discuss about the history of the Soviet Union, or you can discuss about the history of China after Mao. And you have so many different societies which speak about socialism. And you have the social democratic parties which speak about socialism. And you have a very, very, very big field, and maybe that's a problem of the concept socialism. But I would say socialism is a very easy question. It's a question about the criteria of efficiency, and in a very special way the questions of property on means of production.
And you have many different forms how society can deal with such an economic principle.
Don't ask me too many language-related questions, because otherwise my students might notice that I don't actually speak this language. Steve.
I suppose this is a bit language-related, because you say that you and some of the writers you're quoting are talking politicisation in a normative sense. And in English, we often use politicisation to simply mean something becoming politically charged and politically partisan without any normative implication whatsoever, or implying any particular. And indeed, very often this becomes subject of charged partisan debate, with critical inquiry may in fact go rather out the window. And it's perhaps politicisation, and perhaps is it satisfactory to assume that you can use it in a normative sense?
In German also. Yes, in German also. In German, the most use of the term Politisierung, politicization, is not known in a normative sense. That's the reason I argue with Benjamin. Here's the point is, if you speak about, and there you, I think also in the English tradition you have a normative implication. If you speak about the apolitical, and there are something, the generation is apolitical, and so, what are the ways to politicization in a special time, and then you have a normative implication. And if you ask what could mean politicization in a normative sense, it means, yes, it means to bring a question in the public and discuss and have struggles about maybe creating some new, maybe Gestaltung.
It's a wonderful
framework.
German word.
Yes.
Frame to frame something.
To frame, yeah, to frame it, and you have also in every society the question which topics are depoliticized. For example, the economic sphere. In an ideal typical capitalist system, you would say property is a private phenomenon. And so it is not part of the political.
I don't think economics depoliticise in our society very far from it.
No, I would say an ideal typical liberal understanding of sure. So no, but if you write in a law, property is holy, and it's not a part of political debate. What's happened with property? Then you have a special form of depoliticization, and this is a political question. So if you would say the politicization of this question would be the opposition against such a law, and that's a sense in which I take or I understand this.
Okay, further questions and comments. Toby.
Thanks. It's a speculative and hopefully not too vague question, but I think I've got it formulated. You said at the beginning you were describing bourgeois, kind of Enlightenment bourgeois society, and you noted the distinction between the universality of reason in the Enlightenment and the kind of messier plurality of kind of bourgeois life, economic sphere. And it struck me that, of course, they're two sides of one coin, right? I mean, the whole point is you need the universalism of the law and so on to underpin capitalism. And it struck me that perhaps neoliberalism is doing far better at resolving that tension than kind of bourgeois society did, so that the distinction between universality of the reason of Homo neoliberal, if you like, and economic functions are much more melded together, if you say. The tension isn't so apparent. Maybe it's been overcome, I'm not sure. But it strikes me that the version of the university you're suggesting might be to explode that homogeneity. So is that the kind of argument you developed?
Maybe, I hope I understand. But I think maybe it's a little bit also a problem of translation. No, not all, but in one important point. I said bourgeois society, and I meant bürgerliche Gesellschaft. So that's a problem, because not only the Bildung is a typical German problem. We have in German, in the German language, the same word for citizen and for bourgeois, and that's Bürger. And that what in English is bourgeois society is in German bürgerliche Gesellschaft. And we had, it was absurd theater. We had in the last, when the last elections, or the elections before, all the parties began to discuss, because sure, the conservatives traditionally are die Bürgerlichen in Germany. Yeah? You can also say the bourgeois, okay. But now the Social Democrats in the last election said, no, why they are the Bürgerlichen? We are also bürgerlich. Are our voters not Bürger, citizens? And so you have a very, very big chaos with this. So when I say there is a special universalist tradition within bürgerliche Gesellschaft, it's not the bourgeois moment in bürgerliche Gesellschaft, but it's the point that the bourgeois society came historically at the same moment when there were debates about constitutions, debates about human rights, and so on and so on and so on. And and that's so. And if you take this components of this concept of bürgerliche Gesellschaft, then it's clear that the neoliberalism only solves the problem in the sense of a special form of capitalism and in a special form of capitalist universality, sure, in a special way of profit and so and that stuff. But there's the other point of universalism is not plays not so big role in the neoliberal argument. Or?
Well, if it's okay, it's just that you're describing the kind of rights of man tradition in the bourgeois Enlightenment tradition. Of course, this is required or goes hand in glove with the rise of capitalism, especially in the Marxist analysis. And so, for neoliberal capitalism, there is a type of subject that is constructed, a human, if you like, that is constructed along a universalist line. It seems to me, in a way, not dissimilar to differently, obviously, but parallel to the universalist.
Yes, sure.
In the bourgeois Enlightenment.
And maybe if you think this point to an end, and that would be a pessimistic view of the world, sure. You can ask is neoliberalism a special form of bourgeois society without that what was traditionally called bürgerliche Gesellschaft? Yes, so a special form of capitalist emancipation from the own revolutionary heroic tradition, and that can be, and that has consequences also for the university and for this contrafactic hope that there could be a politicized place.
Some new university or something.
Yes, this would be a very radical form of depoliticization in the sense I meant. Because the only struggle is the competition and not class struggle or such stuff.
Thank you. Alex.
In relation to like the neoliberal and managerial university, I just wondered what you would advocate in regard to like the reconciliation between theory and practice for the student bodies who obviously like inhabit at universities as part of like direct participants within those institutions, how they can go about reconciling those two ideas, theory and practice. Like for example, in the humanities department, they'll primarily into like say theory, whereas one of the main like conditions constraints with regard to our education would be say kind of fees and the finances and economics which go behind that. So what would you advocate for us to like directly address the problem with respect to the theory which we practice and then the kind of practice, the empiricism, the economics, just like one example in regards to reconciliation, to try and find kind of a more direct response to the from yourself?
I hope I understand all, but I think you can see in the history of university three steps in the relationship between theory and praxis, or in the modern history of university. The first, that's what I tried with the Enlightenment debate to show a distinction between theory and praxis. And the university is a place of theory and a place of theory against all kinds of praxis. Yeah? So also the economic praxis has no place on this old university, in this old concept. Also in the old humanism of the Renaissance, you have also this argument. I think Luther says in one argument that the people who want to learn in the university or in the higher schools how to make business, they are worse than pigs, and have very strong. And so this old university is a place of theory, and that's a concept I can't translate. But in Germany, you have the concept Elfenbeinturm. That means a place which is very
Ivory tower.
Yeah. Yes. So this is in the classical concept, and then sure. The first question is what's with political praxis, with political acting, and there was an argument. Okay, the states guarantees the freedom of research and the freedom of teaching, also of revolutionary teaching, but it guarees not the freedom of revolutionary acting. So that's one point. And the other point is then came the big modernization in the 19th, 20th century, the 19th century, the big modernization, and now new types of universities, new types of higher education, where engineering, and then you have these two kinds of praxis: economic praxis and political praxis, and I would say, and you have from this point, you have also the debate of what the relationship between university and economic praxis, and what the relationship between university and political praxis, and what's the relationship between political and economical praxis. And I think that's the coordinate system in which the debate also today takes place.
Okay, Tom.
Just following that question, are you suggesting that an emancipated university would be emancipated from praxis in the broad sense that you're using it?
Can you?
So if you're using praxis in an economic sense, but also political praxis, and that comes into the university, politicizes it or depoliticizes it, depending on the term, would the goal then be to get rid of praxis from the university? Was that your advocating?
To do without practice. In der Universität gibt es sozusagen Praxis davon trennen von der Universität. Can you say the question once again? I'll try to.
Right. So
I wasn't actually paying attention.
In the answer to your last question, you describe praxis as being both economic and political, coming from the state. And the university being tied up with that, in order to continue the Enlightenment, or go back to it, emancipating.
Sure. I would say the important point is not that the university has to emancipate from all kind of praxis. And I would also not say that that the university has to emancipate themselves from economic praxis in all way. I think that's not possible. in a modern industrialized society. So I think this very, very, very old concept of university cannot be an actual and currently concept of university. So a very old, which has a theory which is far from any kind of praxis. But I would say, if the university will be a place of thinking, of critical reflection of society, it has to be a place of political praxis, mainly of political praxis, and also in the question what's the Berufsausbildung?
Professional education.
Professional education, and also when in question of professional education, the university has to be a place where it's possible to reflect the functions of the professions and to ask for political acting in the system of political of economic and professional education. So that and I think that's a way to a new concept of university, which is in the concept university there's the term unity. And the old concept was the unity of university is guaranteed by philosophy as a king discipline, and it's a theoretical unity. The currently reality of university is that the unity is guaranteed by the market, in a real or in a fictional sense, but the market. And I would say, if you want to think in the perspective of a unity, you can't have the unity and then you have the unity, but it has to be a political debate about university, about society, about the function of university in society, and you have this conflict or you have this debate as a public. It has to muss eine öffentliche Sphäre stattfinden. Has to take place in the public sphere. Has to take place. Yeah, has to take place in the public sphere. That would be my argument. And so my argument is that the question of unity of the knowledge is only in an emancipated way only to think as a political phenomenon or a political.
Would this be possible within a capitalist framework, you think?
Oh, maybe not.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
I'll ask.
Anthony.
I do just can't help myself from saying one quick thing about Venezuela. I don't really think it's an argument to talk about your mother-in-law. I mean, I think, to be anecdotal, I think there's a whole load of... you spoke, I'm going to speak, and then I'm going to ask you a question. There's a whole lot of other ways of viewing Venezuela, and I think that's very anecdotal and possibly very misleading to just tell the story about one person out of millions. I personally think it's been an incredibly positive 20 years, and I think aspiring for equality and trying to give education to everyone and not just to a few is a really good thing. So I just wanted to counter it. I realise there's problems there, but anyway. Could you, but I'm happy to talk about it with you afterwards. I just don't want us to have a shindig. Could you tell us about concrete ways in which Germany, maybe the German university system is politicised, given that the students a few years ago campaigned to stop fees being introduced or got them reversed in what is an incredibly positive, seems very positive from where we're sitting here. Just to concretise.
I can't make you too much hope.
No, I don't.
The problem is when I studied, it's between 1999 and 2005. There were two bigger strikes. After this time, so the Bologna process and the modularization and all this has changed the culture at the universities. So you had a real politicized university between the 70s and the 80s, and you had some a little bit of this also in the 90s. Later consequences, but I would say the last decades are it's a process of permanent of depoliticization of the university. So it's absolutely contrafactual concept I argued for. It's not that what's in the imperial reality is to see. Yes, but I would say it is the only way to think university in an emancipatory way under the circumstances of a neoliberal university. And you had in Germany in the 70s maybe not uninteresting idea. In the Communist Party of Germany had this idea. They argued for that what they called the policy of gewerkschaftliche Orientierung, orientation on unionism. And the analysis was the university is a place where professional education takes place. That's also a chance, because maybe the young colleagues which study in university are able to understand and to reflect their position in the economic system of society better than a little group of privileged class students. So they tried to implement in the political in the university politics such a concept to discuss with the students about a question of unionism, organizing in a special way. Maybe it's now. It could be time for such strategies now, but also in a time, sure, that the unions are weaker than 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Yes, but that's also in Germany. They are weaker than 20 or 30 years ago. Even they're strong in Germany.
On that point, it might take root more in Germany, as I understand it's still the same way you get lectures and seminars without much personal contact, whereas here the tradition has been very much a personal contact with the tutor. It's going away, but I mean that leads to a different kind of ethos about whether you're going to unionize or not. In fact, you might say it's a more subtle form of domination through friendship. But that is a big difference, I think, between, although it's disappearing here now, I'm afraid.
But in the German universities I teach in the last years, were not places where many political discussion was within the group of the students. That's a little bit other in traditional universities like Marburg or also Frankfurt University. You have a bigger scene, but not as big as in the 70s. Yes, but you have a political scene, and in little universities, in little towns, you have not such a student culture, political student culture. Michael can also speak about the University of Siegen. I think that also there's a little scene, but it is not a university where the students are permanent in struggles or in political actions.
But was it student struggle then that resulted in the fee policy reversal, or was it something else?
Waren das die Studentenaufstände, die dazu geführt haben, dass die dass die Studiengebühr wieder zurückgezogen
Oh yes, sure. That was in my time. Yes, that was the two big strikes in the time I studied or I made my PhD. It was neither not. But I was in Marburg was the point. Can I have an anecdote? In Marburg, the students begin. That's 10 years ago. They began with a tradition to go to the highway. Because Marburg is very practical for that stuff, because there's a highway in the middle of this very little town, and there are some places where it's not very heavy to come on the highway, and so they began there to blockade this highway. And the important thing was that the students in Frankfurt copied this, and the big highway number 5 was closed. And that's why, yeah. But this was 2003, and before the Bologna process, the modularization was fully done, and the students' generations which make this protest were older semester, or they studied not under the new conditions.
Do you think that such a protest would still be possible to take today? I would dare suggest that it would be completely inconceivable.
Yes.
In the UK. I mean, as much as I admire our students, I don't think they'd be capable of actually shutting down British highways, as far as I can tell. But even in Germany, I think it might be.
They used to. In the 70s, late 60s.
Yeah.
Yes, but I think also in Germany it's not.
So in other words, has something changed over the last 10 or 15 years?
It changed many in the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah. Okay, we have 2 questions. Remind me of your name.
It was a comment and just an observation before this woman spoke. In this university space, I was really conscious that in spite of the diversity, the discussion of politicisation of the university space took place exclusively amongst white men. I wondered what you made of that.
Yes, sure. The political tradition, I think the most problematic quote was from Mendelssohn, with the man as man and the man as citizen, but the text is 200 years old. So sure, the politicization of university means, and the politicization not only of university, of the sciences means, that in the disciplines has to takes a debate has to take place, a debate to take place about the social functions of this science and of this discipline. And sure, that's that's not only sure, there all the questions of diversity and all the questions of social groups and of conflicts between social groups has a place, sure.
And I think that's the final question we can ask, because we're nearing 8 o'clock.
I have a question at first point. I'm wondering if your terms for what is the politicisation of students is slightly different than what current students might consider politicisation, because a lot of politics now happens in this sort of online sphere. I don't actually know how much I agree with that, but I think that that's something that needs to be taken into account when you're talking from a slightly different, perhaps generational perspective, saying that students aren't politicised. It could actually be they are, just in very different ways. And I don't know whether you think that because legislation and government practices aren't in the online sphere that youth culture is it going to be a move from the government to be online, or is it going to have to be students taking a step back and saying we're going to take our practices back into the realm of the real world because what we're doing online isn't actually useful?
I would say the question of online or internet in this point is not a main question, because I think if you have a time of social struggles, then this media will play a big role in these social struggles. And if you have a time without big social struggles, and also we have a time of big social struggles, but we have not a time of social struggles where a leftist perspective has a real chance in the moment, and I think that's our problem. Yes, and the media, the online media, plays a big role in the social struggles we have. So I would say the problem is not a problem of the media. It's a problem of yes, a problem of political socialization processes and of places where debates can take place. And the problem is not, actually currently the problem I see is that but that's a new theme that many social contradictions and conflicts we have were articulated in the currently as politics or as policies of identity, and I don't mean the leftist forms of. I mean racism as a policy of identity in all European countries. I mean also the problem of religion and the Salafist policy of identity, and in this forms, the social questions that articulates now in these forms, that are, and I would say this policies of identity that are forms of depoliticization in the normative sense, if you or when you have a time where social struggles take place in the public debate, the media will play an important role in this. Maybe also you have to go offline often because the media are also a field of control and a field of yes. What you do in the internet is not
invisible.
It's not invisible. Yes, that's an important point, surely, for any political administration.
Okay, I think that was a very nice finish. So thank you very much to David Salomon. Let's put our hands together. Now proceed to the wagon and horses for a couple of pints.